Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All right, great. So let's do introductions. I'm Carly Foster, actually. I'm a resilience planner. I don't think I mentioned that early in the main breakout. I've been with Arcadis for 12 years, and I've been doing this kind of work the whole time. I was in commercial real estate development before that, so I came from the dark side, and I'm really happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Lemaire. I'm an urban designer at One Architecture, working on this project in the urban design, mapping, and scenario development that you are going to see today.
Emily, you want to go? Or Bill? Emily?
Sure, happy to go. I didn't know that you were in commercial real estate, Carly. That's cool. I'm Emily Goldstein. I'm a planner with NJDEP in the Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning. We're the office that's administering the grant program, and I am the kind of pseudo project lead for this program. So happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Bill?
Hi, I'm Bill Shadle. I'm with the Nature Conservancy, the New Jersey chapter. I'm our coastal projects manager. I'm not a community member, so I'm really here to be sort of a fly on the wall here. We're trying to keep our ears on the various resilient New Jersey projects to see where they're going. If there's a way we may have some overlapping interests. So and excuse me for turning off my video. I'm still eating dinner, so I don't want you guys to have to watch that, but happy to be here. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, we're so glad to have you. And, you know, you're a subject matter expert in your own right. So I'd love to get your feedback on kind of what's being considered and where things are going, and really hope you'll have time to review the vision report and let us know, you know.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks.
I'll do that.
Yumiko? Okay, I'll go to Alan. I think Yumiko, you're on mute still.
Hello, everybody, once again. Alan Miller from New Jersey DEP, a program called the Community Collaborative Initiative. We are out of the Office of Brownfield and Community Revitalization. I am the liaison for both Jersey City and Bayonne. I work on projects that touch the intersections of environmental challenges, economic development, and quality of life, as identified by those two municipalities. Similar to Bill, I'm going to be more of a fly on the wall since this is community driven rather than regulator driven. And, you know, hopefully I can add something to the discussion at various points in time.
Yeah, and Alan has been an extraordinary resource through this process, and also to the municipalities.
Thank you, Carlin.
Leisha? Leisha's one of our Community Advisory Council members.
Hello, here we are.
Oh, yes, and I see your husband over there too. Hi. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. And Eileen Bergeray, did I say your name right? Eileen?
Yeah, it's Eileen.
Eileen, okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So, like I said, and Jay, we're just doing introductions. Jay and Cynthia. Okay. And like I mentioned before, we're a small enough group that I think, you know, we feel free to kind of pipe in with your thoughts. If you feel more comfortable interacting via chat, then that is okay too. And Greg, if you can follow, you can make sure and catch the chat, because I'm sharing my screen, so it can be hard for me to see those things. So we're really going to be talking about, in a lot of ways, the content of the Vision and Priorities report, and what this is telling us and where this is going. The specific parts of these findings so far that we'll be talking through are the vision, the goals, also flood mappers that have been developed by the different municipalities. And I think we'll spend the most time talking about specific solutions that have been recommended. We'll talk about those by type. And then we can also talk about evaluation criteria. Evaluation criteria are basically, there are criteria that we use to guide decision-making, and we need to make sure that those are right. And so those have been updated based on feedback that we've gotten so far. And then Greg will talk through kind of our next steps in scenario development. So as I mentioned, feel free to interrupt, pipe in, and we'd love for this to be a dialogue. Kind of the first item here is, and we sort of start high level and then we go to specifics, and it's really important actually to get this high level stuff right, because it ultimately ends up being the light in the distance that we use to guide the decisions made by kind of the technical team and anyone that is deciding kind of how things move forward. So this is the working mission statement. We update it throughout the project based on feedback that we have, and this has been updated for the vision report. And I'll just leave it on the screen and would love to kind of hear whether or not this sounds right. The idea here is that it's emphasizing deep collaboration between both local and state governments, community-based organizations, with input from the public and other stakeholders, and really leaving a legacy of regional investment, resource and information sharing to help our people and places thrive in the decades to come. It will be driven by best available data, technical evaluation, inclusive and equitable engagement, leverage best practices to create social, environmental, and economic benefits, and bring value to those who live in the region now and all who will share in the region's future. That bolded part is the part that changed based on feedback that we got through previous engagement, because a lot of folks expressed fear of gentrification through both, both from flooding and from potential solutions that might be developed. And, and like I said, feel free to come off mute and I'll just keep moving if there's no direct feedback on that. These are some of the goals that have been shared. We've organized these goals by pillar of resilience. We often talk about the 5 pillars of resilience. They also correlate to 5 different types of infrastructure that exist within every community: environment, economic, social, physical, and government. And so a lot of what we've heard is about the need for more green space and trees, the need to integrate green infrastructure. There was a huge theme about waste management that came across, and cleaner water bodies, contamination management. From an economic perspective, this idea that perhaps we could develop solutions that can create jobs at the same time and provide training for those jobs, so green jobs, and focus on solutions that could help bring economic diversity and preservation of small businesses. The solutions could be programmatic and policy related, and so those are some things we can look at. From a social perspective, we heard a lot about this need to preserve a sense of home and community and lean into the cultural diversity of the region. A lot about improved cleanliness, health and safety, access to food, affordable quality housing, parks and public spaces has been just a significant theme of all of the engagements so far, as well as improved access to transportation. This was also highlighted as a strength in the region, but not everywhere, and improved pedestrian and biker experiences. We also have heard a lot of feedback about the relationship between community members and the government, whether it's the local government, or the state government, this resounding feedback about the need for greater transparency, more public involvement and investment in the relationship between government and community members. So making sure that it's really clear what decisions are being made and why and how those benefits exist, and following through on commitments. Do you think is anything missing here? And this, I think we can drop the links to these in the chat a little bit later, but we've heard a lot of feedback on the need to ground truth data with what people are really experiencing. So we heard from Kay in the last meeting that a lot of people are experiencing flooding that isn't mapped, and we know about this problem. And so we're trying to create more ways that people can share, you know, where they're experiencing flooding and having it all go into one place. So Newark, Hoboken, and Jersey City is also working on one. They have their own flood maps, but then New Jersey itself has created the My Coast app. And one of the things that we're doing from a Resilient New Jersey perspective is working on pulling all these data together, so that it doesn't just get lost if it's going in one place and not connecting to another thing. That's been a really important element. But if you send your information into any of these places, it will all end up with us, and it will all end up in the technical analysis. So before we get into the specific solutions, just sort of one more slide about how we're incorporating the feedback that we're receiving into the project. So these are three major themes that we've heard a lot. Vision for greener communities. People want to see, in some cases, concrete torn up. You know, they want it to be replaced with greenery. Concerns about toxic flooding, and a lot of frustration about the response to the summer storms. If you were on our last meeting, we had a community member express just a huge amount of frustration at trying to even navigate any of the financial support that's being provided. And so some of the ways that we're working on integrating this feedback is we are developing recommendations and identifying areas where we could implement distributed green infrastructure in public spaces and right of way. Kay was right in the earlier meeting that this is not going to solve the problem, but the problem in this region is so large that there's not one particular thing that we could do to resolve all of it. But this is something that could help take the edge off, and green infrastructure has multiple benefits in addition to the little bit that it provides in flood risk reduction. It can help address urban heat island effect. People are just happier when they're exposed to green space. That's been well studied. We're also working on exploring a potential regional coalition for implementation of green infrastructure. We'll talk about that in one of our solution types. And also this idea of redeveloping vacant lots to green public spaces. There are multiple disparate programs right now that support accomplishing various goals in the state, whether it's cleanup of contaminated sites, or implementing stormwater projects, or adding green space. And one of the things that we're working on doing is figuring out, and is there a way that we can mush all these together? Like we can put these together as puzzle pieces to accomplish our goals. And so some of that engagement is taking place, and Alan can probably speak to that at length. And then we're also looking at the LTCPs, that is the long-term control plans, to reduce combined sewer overflows. So there's a lot of investigation into those actions and how there could be alignment with them to reduce flooding. This contaminated sites and brownfields comment is also related to the comment I made earlier about kind of the puzzle pieces coming together. And we're looking for opportunities where we have low risk contaminants that can be cleaned up. And then those spaces could be leveraged for stormwater management and possible green space. So that's an investigation that is ongoing right now to identify those sites. And then another piece is this IDA after action concept and engaging the emergency management community and developing recommendations, which we'll talk about some of the recommendations that we have so far in just a few minutes. So these are the 5 solution types that we'll be talking through that are also present in the report, and we'll go through them beginning with the outreach, education, and capacity building. And then we'll kind of cycle through here, and would love to hear your feedback on anything that you think is missing, or if this sounds right, if this resonates with you. So any questions or comments so far?
Carly, this is Alan, and this entire endeavor at this point is very successful in my view. You know, you're addressing a lot of need, and I think it brings to light some of the disconnects within various state government entities, their priorities versus their rules, as well as pulling together not just, I mean, I know DEP is very heavily invested in all of this, but there's a lot of other state entities out there, and a lot of our sister agencies should also be pulled into this conversation, whether it be Department of Community Affairs, New Jersey Transit, DOT, because everybody within the state has a stake in resiliency. And hopefully this is the beginning of a larger and higher level and more inclusive conversation that brings all of the state agencies to the table.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, that's been a lot of what we've learned here from all levels, right? That's feedback that has been shared at the community level, the experience of people with, you know, the agencies and how they work together, to the cities, to the state agencies themselves. That governance infrastructure is an area where we need a lot of resilience building. And I think you're right. One of the things that's been really exciting about this process is that this process itself and bringing that awareness is a resilience building. It has resilience building implications. So this is the, you know, these are just some of the things that we're looking at from an outreach, education, and capacity building perspective. We've been hearing a lot of feedback about the need to just make things clearer about flood risks, preparedness, resources. We've been calling it the single source of truth. And that's a key recommendation that we're making to NJDEP and others to make sure that that there's a clear authority on certain topics that people can go to learn about what's going on, and that, you know, that they can have certainty, and that everyone is sort of playing on the same sheet of music, because we're hearing a lot about portal proliferation syndrome, where there's so much information that is like all over the place that people are not, they're not benefiting from it. It's creating confusion. And so they need a single source of truth on, you know, what truly is flood risk, what types of projects might help reduce flooding, what is resilience and why does it matter, just from a general education perspective. But from a preparedness and recovery perspective, you know, how do you even navigate these resources and programs to have them work for you? And that's the financial and preparedness breakout that we're having tonight. And we heard a lot about how people are really struggling with that program within the breakout that we had at 4 o'clock. We also heard a lot about the need to make sure that all of this information is accessible to folks that it might not usually be served or accessed by the people that are putting this information out. So targeting seniors, residents of affordable housing complexes, non-English speaking populations. And that's actually been a really interesting learning experience for us working through this process, because there were 10 languages other than English that were prioritized for Northeastern New Jersey. That's how diverse this community is. And that was actually dropping off some of the languages, but figuring out how to reach those folks and make materials available to them is a really interesting learning experience, and it's an opportunity for growth. And then this idea of maybe packaging this information so that it can be shared. I'll talk a little bit later about this idea of resilience hubs, which seems to be a potential way that we could share this information out. So some of what we've heard about physical and nature-based solutions, there's a lot of feedback that we heard about people wanting solutions that offer co-benefits. This is a concrete rich region. There is a lot of concrete. And so we hear a lot about how, people want less of that. And so we need solutions that are going to improve quality of life at the same time that they're helping to reduce flooding. So green infrastructure and trees. We've been looking for opportunities to create multi-purpose parks. That's actually, Greg, did I let you introduce yourself at the beginning of this? You did? Okay. So that's something that Greg has been, what day is it? That's something that Greg has been, looking at deeply as a landscape architect. He's been diving into where might we have these opportunities for multi-purpose parks. And this idea of reusing vacant and abandoned lots. Some really great feedback that we had that we integrated into the visioning report was that people want to see us do an inventory of vacant space, not just like vacant parking lots, but like vacant unused buildings, and figuring out like how we can make that space better. Maybe we could couple it with some of these resilience improvements. So that's really interesting and something that we're looking into. Obviously, the sewer separation and capacity, the stormwater, that's huge, this, and then also actions by residents, which are being talked about in the other in the other breakout. We've heard a lot about basement flooding too, and that people just really struggling to understand kind of how to address that. Lots of flooding from adjacent properties, spilling water from the gutters and causing basement flooding. And so those are some of the things that we're also thinking about. And welcome, Janet and Tyler. So I said at the beginning, we're looking for your feedback as we're talking through these things. So feel free to come off mute and pipe in and say, that sounds right, but that's not, all our goals. And the vision report is about setting up our decision-making process. And the things that we are analyzing from a technical perspective to make sure that they happen. So one of the investigations that is deep underway right now is into land use and policy, and ensuring that, and so we're looking at ways to ensure that new development considers climate change, sea level rise, and impacts to flooding in other areas. There's a lot of feedback that we've gotten on that. And these are some of the things that we've heard directly from you all, which is really interesting because it aligns so much with what we are assessing as subject matter experts. The people that live and work in these communities, they often, some of these solutions are kind of common sense. What needs to happen. And so it's also really nice to be able to kind of take that feedback and elevate it up and show how much people who live in these areas really know. So, on-site stormwater management requirements, impervious surface, reducing that, finding ways to integrate green space into any development, limits to development in flood hazard areas or increasing density in our lower risk areas, And there are a lot of things that are already underway, which is great. And we highlight some of that in the report. There are flood damage prevention ordinances in every one of these municipalities. And Jersey City has a really interesting flood overlay zone that is worth exploring, that we've also been looking at. So we've been reviewing the existing ordinances and policies in every one of the municipalities. We have been meeting with sort of the zoning and building code officials, and we're putting together those recommendations. So they're in sort of a draft form, and we'll be able to share those in a lot more detail with the scenarios that we put out in the winter. And I think this is getting at some of what you raised a moment ago, Alan, is this intergovernmental coordination and decision making. One of the things that we're learning as our risk context is changing is that, you know, a lot of the structures that were put in place, or even the policies that were put in place back in the 70s, are no longer serving us. And we have to reconsider them, and we have to break down silos and ensure that these agencies are working together. So people want to see consistency in decision-making related to resilience. What sheet of music are you playing off of? You know, what sea level rise projections are you considering? What is the guidance that is being followed to make decisions about what infrastructure goes where? Is DOTD or is DOT coordinated with the municipality, for example, and how all of that guidance and those kind of decision-making standards are being communicated. We've gotten feedback from folks about the models, for example, the NJDEP developed for Resilient New Jersey. Are those same models going to be used by other state agencies to make their decisions? And so that's part of the conversations that are ongoing. Overcoming barriers to project implementation. So this is something that, you know, is not necessarily always visible at like the community member level, except for that you see things not moving forward. Like, why does it take so long to do the things that we know need to happen? And a lot of the time we just don't have the frameworks in place to facilitate the movement of big decisions, or even sometimes the small decisions. So in New Jersey, there's a program called the Green Acres Program, which is a great program for creating recreational space. But the interesting thing about that program is that it requires that you maintain the use of a space as recreational. You don't divert that space, you know, at any point in time. But the interesting thing is that it also makes it very difficult to integrate stormwater related improvements. So one of the things that engineers and planners often look for is the opportunity to leverage park space to capture stormwater, even underneath the ground, so you don't even see it. But that's something that is very difficult to do in New Jersey. And so that's something that, you know, we're having conversations about. Another interesting barrier is that FEMA funds stormwater projects, and they fund flood protection projects, but they will not fund decontamination. And one thing that is prolific in, you know, this part of New Jersey is contaminated sites. And so a lot of the things that the sites that we might consider for doing stormwater related improvements, they first need to go through decontamination. And we have to go through a different program to kind of make that happen before we can go for funding to make the stormwater protection happen. So it's very, you know, some of these things are some of the things that Resilient New Jersey is looking at and working on. And then obviously a clear role for this resilience building perspective. Creating leadership positions that are dedicated to resilience, to making sure that our infrastructure decisions are being coordinated and that we're considering the resilience of infrastructure to future hazards, and the resilience, and that infrastructure itself is not decreasing the resilience of folks around it. So like we hear a lot from people about how new development is increasing risk within their community. And we need to make sure that those decisions are being coordinated. So anything that we're doing to improve somebody's life over here is not making somebody else's life worse over here. And a lot of that just has to do with coordination. Alan, did you come off mute?
Yeah, yeah, I was marking my words because
I can't
there's-
even make it
I-
louder.
there's- I'm sorry, Janet, did you want to say something?
She said, I think she said you need to be a little louder.
Oh, okay. I sound loud to me, so I don't know if I'm not sounding loud to others. It's interesting. All of what you pointed out is so very true. One of the other issues that New Jersey is blessed with, but it's also a curse, is home rule. So when you have local decision-making, and home rule is a great tool for land use, you know, there's certain state policies that may not be able to be implemented or don't have to be implemented at a local level. This whole notion of using contaminated sites and redevelopment sites for stormwater management is a great idea. There's a number of projects that we can point to that have implemented these types of projects in the recent past. And I think with the coordination and structure moving forward, a lot can be accomplished. What public and what I still need to realize is state government it's like a huge ship rather than a speedboat. It does not turn quickly and easily. Therefore, I think that expectations, you know, I always talk about managing expectations when I work on projects. And, you know, Carly, you talked about consistency of how you get things done. And I think this is a big factor when we're talking about outreach and education for the general public to understand that as much as we would like to see things happen yesterday, with the exception of demands that come down from upper management that we have to turn around that immediately, policies don't change quickly. So it needs to be moved not only from the local level, but from the regional level as well. And, you know, I think this is one of those, you know, it takes all oars rowing in the same direction, to use a metaphor of water, to, you know, to get across the finish line quickly. That's my little editorial comment.
Hear, hear. And so these are some of the examples of service or program development that have come up that we're exploring. So this is feedback that we received from community members that they want to see. And this is a solution type that we hadn't been considering previously. But there's this really fascinating intersection between health and waste management and flooding that has consistently come up through our community meetings. And so folks are looking for, or we've been hearing about this need for better programs around waste reduction and management, that this is actually directly increasing flood risk by clogging storm catch basins, contributing to flooding, but also creating health concerns. And so we've heard about sort of creating municipal composting program, increasing availability of trash cans, and then increased garbage patrols and removal. And that's an example of sort of municipal actions. And these are also very kind of locally specific feedback that we've gotten for the municipalities. All these green programs are also something that could happen either at a municipal level or at a regional level. But implementing small scale stormwater management, so having sort of a coordinated effort at this, maybe through even community-based organizations. There's been some feedback that we've gotten on the specifics of that. And leveraging this for education and awareness and actually getting people into the streets to help implement these programs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of feedback about emergency response and preparedness. And so one of the things that we're exploring doing is this, we'll call it a service shed analysis. I often talk about interdependencies when we talk about risk and resilience. And this is sort of something that we've been alluding to throughout this conversation this evening, is that there are so many interdependencies within a single community. And then when you take it to the region and beyond, you know, if a single substation, which is a power piece of infrastructure, floods, that could cut out the power for a huge number of homes or hospital, and that substation or the origin of that could exist outside of your community. Same thing with evacuation routes, water and wastewater, and all of these different things. So looking at evacuation routes and potential bottleneck points, where, you know, there are evacuation routes within the region that have been identified for that purpose, but they're at capacity when there's not a disaster. So the idea of being able to evacuate a really dense area with roadways that don't have the capacity to do that and may flood themselves is something that is worth looking at. So that's something that we're looking at with the risk assessment. We've heard a lot about the need for improved warning systems. We've heard from the deaf community about the need for improved communication for them. Because, you know, it doesn't work to send out emergency broadcast signals over the radio when, you know, when not everyone is able to hear that. Sheltering, inclusive of pets, improved sheltering. There's also repeat flooded streets. Like at this point, like this summer, we know which streets flood all the time. So the idea of like preemptively blocking them, that seems sort of like low-hanging fruit that could potentially make things better and safer for folks. And then this resilience hubs concept is kind of an emerging favorite of mine. We're actually pursuing some funding to pilot a resilience hub, and hopefully that will happen. But the idea of a resilience hub is a place that you know, can have power during a disaster. It can maybe be a heating and cooling center, but it can also be a place in your neighborhood that you can go, that you can learn about and have resources to meet your needs pre and post disaster and during recovery, because then it will be neighborhood centric, and the idea of having kind of a regional network of resilience hubs. So that's something that we're kind of exploring. And so I know we're running out of time. So what I'll do just really quickly is point you to the categories of evaluation criteria rather than going through them in depth, because these are all in the report, but these are important guidelines for us to follow. And we're looking for you to provide feedback on them. Basically, they're like forks in the road, evaluation criteria are. Is the solution going to do this, or is it going to do this? Well, the community said they wanted to do this, so, you know, we're going to go in this direction. So this is kind of like the roadmap that we use to make decisions. Threshold criteria are things that the solution must do. If it doesn't do it, then we're not going to consider it. And so we've identified a lot of those from feedback that we've gotten so far. Alternatives evaluation criteria are criteria that we use to choose between two things that maybe meet the threshold. And so those are really important guidance pieces. So I'm going to pop through these. We're working on this in the fall. Let me see. This is in process, and we've actually taken the region and we've distilled it into 13 different study areas. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg quickly to talk us through our next steps here. So you've seen a lot of different solutions that are being explored, and we're also now going to also take this stuff and we're going to make it really geographically specific, in addition to kind of things that we could do region-wide.
Thanks, Carly. So you may be asking yourself, what is a scenario? So in this case, for this project, defined by NJDEP, it's essentially a tool to help stakeholders and decision makers understand the different methods to get to the desired outcome of flood risk reduction by the year 2070 and before. As you can see in the lower half of this slide, these are the threshold criteria that Carly was just mentioning, the 4 things that all scenarios must achieve. So flood risk reduction, that's why we're all here. Environmental restoration, we in no way want to take away anything from the environment, any green spaces, we want to enhance it, strengthen it, use it for flood risk reduction. Economic development, that one's relatively self-explanatory. We don't want to do anything to hurt the economy of these cities, both existing and future. And then socially vulnerable populations. We do have a very large and diverse region that does have many socially vulnerable populations that we want to protect. They also happen to be concentrated in a lot of the floodplain areas. So, slide. So as Carly just said, we originally started with 16 focus areas based on the prevalence of flooding, both rainfall and coastal. They then got distilled and recombined into 13. And these together we zoomed into these spaces in order to see basically on the ground conditions. They represent different flood profiles, different constituencies, different land use types, etc. So for example, Doremus Avenue and downtown Newark are not going to have the same solutions. One's industrial, one's very commercial. So these will further be developed into 3 distinct scenarios. These scenarios will have themes that unify them in some way. They could be different goals, like protecting key infrastructure, enhancing the environment as the main goal. The current thrust of the project is leading us towards complexity of implementation. So at the baseline scenario, scenario 0, those would be the existing projects that have some buy-in, they have some plans for them. They've already been advanced a bit. We just want to strengthen and advance those further. Then on the other extreme, scenario 2, could be something that involves much more regional investment, regional buy-in, state agency buy-in, etc. Something that will be a bit more complex, but overall, with its implementation, will better reduce flood risk and have a greater impact. Then through these, we will be presenting the scenarios to you all if you come back next spring. We will be working on these scenarios over the winter, and eventually they will be distilled down to a preferred scenario that could grab from the buckets of each scenario. So something more localized, something more regional, etc. And this will synthesize into a final action plan in June of next year. Thank you.
Yeah. So any questions on anything that we talked about so far? Any additional feedback? Welcome, Kinney. It's good to see you. And so based on what we talked about in terms of sort of the 5 different project types and the things that are being kind of considered and advanced based on the feedback that we've gotten so far, are we on the right track? Is there anything that you think is really missing that you want to see? And I can pull up the list of types here. Okay. And our next steps, we're going to have community meetings that will deep dive into solutions, specific geographic solutions in the study areas that Greg mentioned. We're doing that in Newark and Jersey City. We may, there may be an opportunity to do Bayonne as well. That's something that we're talking about. And then we will have another region-wide community meeting to present the 3 scenarios in, we're looking at January. And so we're at time. And so if anybody, if you need to drop, then you're welcome to. We very much appreciate your time today. And I'm also happy to stay on if there's additional questions or conversation pieces.